They executed humanity's Envoy. Earth's ruthless response shattered the galaxy. Imagine walking into a meeting hoping for peace and realizing you're the main course. Today, humanity's Envoy stood alone against the galaxy's betrayal, and when the first shot was fired, Earth's answer was unlike anything the stars had ever seen. Stay with us, because what happens next will redefine what it means to fight for survival. Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story, where we bring you the fiercest, most human moments among the stars. If you love stories about courage, betrayal, and impossible comebacks, you're in the right place. Before we dive deeper, what would you do if you were Earth's ambassador, knowing the galaxy had already sentenced you? Would you fight, negotiate, or go down swinging? Tell me your answer in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so you don't miss any upcoming battles. Secret password for today's true fans: comment Earth never kneels if you're watching till the end. Let's begin. The stars outside the viewport stretched and twisted like wet paint pulled across a broken canvas. Ambassador Daniel Harris watched without wonder. Faster-than-light travel had long since lost its magic for him, just another nauseating reminder that humanity had traded all for efficiency. He adjusted the cuff of his perfectly tailored navy suit, the Earth emblem stitched over his heart. Somewhere in a drawer back on Earth, probably gathering dust next to his old medals and unpaid parking tickets, was the original uniform he had once worn proudly, a soldier before he was a diplomat, a hammer before he was asked to become a velvet glove. Captain Elizabeth Mercer stood at the bridge beside him, her uniform impossibly crisp, her posture straight enough to shame a ruler. 20 years younger, full of military vigilance and a level of optimism Daniel had long since had surgically removed. "They're scanning us like a fat turkey before Thanksgiving," she muttered, arms crossed. Daniel smiled thinly. "Maybe they're just admiring the stuffing." She didn't laugh. Soldiers rarely did when they suspected they were being sized up for slaughter. Behind them, Dr. Alan Palmer fussed with his tablet, muttering xenolinguistic curses under his breath. Daniel caught the words imperative verb structures and passive-aggressive syntax, and decided he didn't want to know. Language was like politics: the more you understood, the worse it smelled. The USS Horizon slowed its glide toward the Galactic Confederation's central hub, an enormous, rotating wheel of metal and pride, hosting 27 alien species who all agreed on one thing: humans were the uninvited guest at their cosmic dinner party. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Daniel said, because that's what you were supposed to say when you were about to kiss hands that might later strangle you. In truth, the station reminded him of an old amusement park ride he once took Lisa, his wife, to during their brief, stupidly happy honeymoon. Spinning, flashing, overpriced, and almost certainly designed to make you puke. He touched the lapel pin, Earth's continents etched in gold, and felt the small, solid presence of the emergency beacon hidden inside. Press it once, and Earth would come storming like a wounded beast. Press it twice, and, well, it wasn't recommended. The comms officer barked that they were being hailed. Elizabeth straightened up. Dr. Palmer looked like he wanted to hide behind his tablet. Daniel did what any seasoned ambassador would do: he straightened his tie and imagined he was already dead, which made everything easier to endure. The alien face that bloomed on the view screen had 4 eyes, no discernible nose, and a mouth like a scar left by bad surgery. It issued docking instructions with all the warmth of an eviction notice. Deviations will not be tolerated. Elizabeth leaned closer, voice low. Was that a welcome or a warning? Daniel shrugged. What's the difference anymore? They docked with a metallic shudder that Daniel felt deep in his spine. He remembered the first time he left Earth's gravity, a young recruit with stars in his eyes and vomit in his helmet. Now he mostly felt bone-deep fatigue and a faint yearning for chairs that didn't bolt themselves to the floor. As he prepared to disembark, Daniel caught his reflection in the polished surface of the hatch door. 53, gray at the temples, lines around his mouth from years of biting back things better left unsaid. Lisa had said he looked distinguished now. A distinguished corpse in waiting, he thought, adjusting his jacket. The hatch opened with a hiss. 3 aliens awaited them, each dressed in ceremonial robes that screamed diplomacy in the same way as Shark's smile screamed dinner. Coordinator Selmarin, a Talaxian with shimmering scales and hands like bundled twigs, welcomed them with flawless English and the warmth of a tax auditor. Daniel bowed slightly, offering practiced smiles. "We are honored to be here," he said, while mentally drafting his will. The delegation marched down wide, sterile corridors that smelled faintly of ozone and old plastic. Alien eyes followed their passage, some curious, some hostile, some calculating the resale value of Daniel's organs. As they walked, Daniel remembered something his father once said while fixing a rusted old truck in their backyard. "You ever notice how people say trust us the loudest right before they screw you?" Ahead, the Grand Assembly awaited, ready to judge, to welcome, or to gut them like fish on a Sunday market. Daniel Harris squared his shoulders, smoothed his jacket, and thought, "At least if I die today, I won't have to sit through another goddamn fundraising dinner." Daniel Harris had always thought that real betrayal would come with loud trumpets, raised fists, and a clear villain twirling his mustache. Instead, it arrived wrapped in polite smiles, mandatory hospitality, and a persistent sense that someone, somewhere, was slowly pushing a knife between his ribs with the care of a seasoned surgeon. The corridors of the Confederation station stretched endlessly ahead, pristine and polished, lit by soft lights meant to soothe. Daniel wasn't soothed. He had seen war zones with friendlier welcomes. Elizabeth Mercer walked beside him, her sharp gaze sweeping over every passing alien, every security checkpoint disguised as hospitality detail. Her hand twitched near her sidearm, though she knew as well as Daniel did that drawing a weapon here would be like lighting a cigarette in a powder magazine. Dr. Palmer whispered close behind, nose buried in his translator device. Imperative commands increasing, decreased honorifics, tonal aggression, subtle but growing. Translation, they were being told what to do like disobedient schoolchildren, and nobody was bothering to pretend otherwise anymore. Daniel thought of Lisa again, his wife, patient beyond reason, who once sewed up a gash in his arm during a camping accident and muttered, "You bleed like a stuck pig but you bitch like a poet." She had begged him not to go on this mission. So had the president, in a roundabout way, by giving him a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Heroes didn't get to retire peacefully. They just ran out of wars. The station air grew thicker as they neared the Grand Assembly Hall. Not physically, the environmental controls were perfect, of course, but spiritually, like walking into a church where the congregation was already sharpening their knives. As the massive amphitheater doors parted, Daniel found himself facing an audience that wasn't even pretending to be neutral. Hundreds of alien eyes, some glittering, some blinking sideways, some glaring from slitted lids, turned toward him. Watching. Judging. He'd walked into courtrooms before. He'd testified before inquiry panels that wanted his head on a pike. He had survived hostile negotiations, backroom deals, and assassination attempts that smelled suspiciously like bad bourbon. This was different. This wasn't politics. This was theater. And he had just been cast as the sacrificial goat. Elizabeth stiffened beside him. Her voice was low, almost a growl. "Sir, formation's wrong. Security's boxing us in, not protecting." Daniel smiled faintly. Just another day in paradise. They walked toward the raised platform at the center as instructed, a dignified little procession heading toward its own funeral. As they moved, Daniel couldn't help noticing how the alien delegates clustered together, species that were historically enemies now sitting side by side, whispering into each other's gills, mandibles, or psychic fields. He wondered idly if betrayal was a universal language easier than Esperanto. The High Arbiter, a spindly creature with too many eyes and too few expressions, stood solemnly at the dais. His voice, when it came, was the rich syrup of bureaucratic doom. "Humans of Earth," he said, and even that simple greeting sounded like a condemnation. "You have been summoned to address serious concerns before diplomatic relations may proceed." Daniel bowed slightly, formal, respectful. A dog showing its belly before a pack of wolves and hoping they weren't hungry. "High Arbiter, Earth comes in peace. We seek friendship, cooperation, mutual prosperity. Murmurs ran through the chamber like rats fleeing a sinking ship. A Vorn general stomped forward, hulking, gray-skinned, with ridges on his skull like armor grown from spite. Daniel had read intelligence briefs on the Vorn, aggressive, hierarchical, and capable of differentiating diplomacy from conquest. They understood only strength and weakness, preferably someone else's. Ambassador Harris, the Vorn barked, "You stand accused of deception. Earth's technological growth is unnatural. Your people are preparing for war." Daniel blinked. Not because the accusation surprised him, but because he realized with a sinking heart that they didn't want an answer. They already had one. Earth's rapid development had frightened them. Humanity, that scrappy little upstart species, wasn't behaving like a proper, deferential newcomer. No. Humans were solving problems, innovating, challenging the natural order of galactic stagnation. The Confederation didn't fear Earth's weapons. They feared Earth's imagination. And if Daniel had learned anything from human history, it was this: there's nothing scarier to an empire than a peasant who dreams. He stood straight, feeling the sharp edge of history pressing against his spine. Earth desires peace. But we are not fools. We prepare because history teaches us one immutable truth: trust is cheap until bullets start flying. The chamber buzzed angrily. Somewhere above, recording drone's word, capturing every syllable, every facial twitch. Future historians would dissect this moment like vultures picking clean a carcass. Elizabeth shifted beside him, hands twitching in that soldier's way that said she was calculating odds, exits, survival rates. Dr. Palmer muttered translations too fast to catch. The air was thick with words, accusations, and visible nooses tightening around their necks. Daniel thought about war, not the grand, heroic kind sung about in dusty books, but the real kind. Mud, blood, terror, betrayal, and the endless, grinding stupidity that made young men old and old men dead. He thought about how war always started with a speech and ended with a grave. He thought about how very stupid it was that humanity had made it all the way to the stars only to find the same old rotten script playing out in a shinier theater. And then, as the accusations piled higher, as the so-called evidence began to flicker across the holographic display, images manipulated, forged, absurd, Daniel had one final, deeply unprofessional thought. If I survive this, I'm demanding a raise. And if I don't, well, at least I'll finally get out of paying my taxes. The holographic display flickered to life like a magician unveiling a cheap trick everyone was too polite, or too afraid, to boo. Grainy images floated above the Grand Assembly's floor, fleets of massive human warships, dark and bristling, swarming across stars that bore suspicious resemblance to stock footage from training simulations. Daniel Harris watched the fabrication unfold with an expression carefully cultivated over decades, the dignified patience of a man who knew the difference between a trial and a lynching, and understood which one he was attending. Beside him, Captain Elizabeth Mercer clenched her jaw so tightly he could hear it creak. Dr. Palmer muttered under his breath, a soft string of academic profanity only partially muffled by his translator device. The accusations came fast and furious. Evidence. Proof. Conspiracy. Warmongering. Humanity, they claimed, had been building secret fleets, plotting galactic conquest, sharpening knives in the dark. Daniel wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so brutally inevitable. You gave a monkey a match, and it built a fire. You gave a human a starship, and it built an empire, in theory, anyway. Never mind that Earth had barely managed to keep itself from boiling over like a badly watched kettle. The Confederation wasn't afraid of humanity's weapons. They were afraid of humanity's ambition. He raised his hand politely, the way one might ask to speak at a funeral for someone nobody liked. These images are fabrications, he said, his voice calm but ringing in the cavernous chamber. Earth does not possess these fleets. We seek peace. The High Arbiter barely concealed a yawn. General Vexner, the Vorn representative with all the charm of a blunt axe, snarled from the council floor. Words, words, words. Always the words, Ambassador. Where are your actions? Daniel thought briefly of his actions, fighting in dirty wars on dirtier planets, negotiating ceasefires that lasted just long enough for the bodies to be buried. Actions, he murmured, are rarely as pretty as words. The security around them tightened. He saw it in the subtle shifting of alien guards, the way their weapons hung heavier in their hands, the way their eyes flickered not with vigilance but with finality. The way wolves looked at a lamb that had already been named dinner. Elizabeth shifted closer, whispering, "We need to get out of here. Now." Daniel smiled grimly. "And go where? The gift shop?" The hologram changed, footage of supposed human secret bases hidden in the asteroid belts, ships massing in shadowy fleets like some horror story dreamed up by a paranoid bureaucrat. No debate. No questions. No defense. They weren't here to listen. They were here to pronounce sentence. As Daniel straightened his jacket, he realized two very human truths. First, that justice was just a name you gave to vengeance when you wanted to sleep at night. Second, that diplomacy was a lot like being the designated driver at a bar full of drunk psychopaths. No matter how careful you were, eventually someone was going to throw a punch. The High Arbiter, that spindly marionette of a creature, lifted his too thin arms for silence. The Confederation Security Council moves to classify humanity as a level 1 threat species, he intoned. Murmurs. Agreement. Ritualized betrayal. Daniel saw Elizabeth's hand twitch toward her sidearm again. He gave her the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. From somewhere deep inside the assembly, a low, rhythmic sound began, delegates pounding the floor with feet, tendrils, claws. A ritual of condemnation. An ancient tradition, no doubt, steeped in the same kind of moral cowardice that built monuments to peace while funding armies behind the curtain. Daniel's mind drifted back, unbidden, to his grandfather's stories. How leaders always wrapped violence in ceremony. How speeches paved roads straight into mass graves. How good men were always left to pick up the pieces after bad men finished pretending to care. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Mostly, Daniel Harris felt tired. Bone deep, soul-rotting tired. The kind of tired you only earned by surviving long enough to realize that no matter where you went in the universe, stupidity had a passport. The platform beneath him vibrated. A security field rose around him, transparent, humming with power, a coffin you could see through. Elizabeth lunged forward, only to be yanked back by guards. Palmer shouted something he probably thought sounded legally persuasive. Daniel stood alone now. High Arbiter Claxier leaned forward, voice dripping with false pity. Ambassador Harris, you have been found guilty of endangering galactic stability. Per the statutes of preservation, your sentence is immediate disintegration. Daniel looked around one last time, the Grand Assembly, the delegates, the guards, the polished metal walls that would forget him before his atoms even settled. He thought of Lisa's face. He thought of Earth's sky, open and wild and stupidly beautiful. He thought of the thousand small kindnesses humanity had managed to invent between all the wars and stupidity. Coffee shared between enemies. Laughter at funerals. Hope stitched into broken things. And as the energy field around him began to glow brighter, heating the air, curling the edges of his suit, Daniel Harris thought, well, at least I won't have to listen to another goddamn mission debrief. The energy field crackled louder, the buzz of a machine winding up to do what hands had become too civilized to attempt. Disintegration sounded cleaner than firing squads, less messy than nooses, but Daniel Harris suspected the results were the same, ash and a rapidly cooling seat at the table. The delegates watched with the rapt attention of spectators at a public hanging. Some leaned forward, eager for the moment. Some looked away, ashamed at how little their shame would matter. Most simply recorded it all, ready to file the execution into some bloated report titled Necessary Measures to Preserve Galactic Stability. Daniel stood very still. There was dignity in stillness, even if there was none in the circus around him. Across the chamber, Captain Elizabeth Mercer struggled against the guards. Her eyes met Daniel's, wide, desperate, a soldier's rage at helplessness. He gave her the smallest nod. Not of surrender, but of inevitability. A gesture that said, "It's all right." It was always going to end like this. In a way, Daniel thought, it was almost funny. He had survived 6 wars, 4 political scandals, and a marriage that should have earned him a Congressional Medal of Honor. Yet here he was, about to be vaporized by a committee that couldn't even agree on the color of their carpets without forming a subcommittee first. Somewhere deep in his bones, Daniel could almost hear his father laughing, the rough bark of a man who taught him to patch wounds with duct tape and settle arguments with whiskey. "Remember, boy," the old man had said once, hammering a bent nail straight, "you can survive almost anything except a room full of cowards pretending to be heroes." The energy field shimmered brighter. His skin prickled with static, the smell of ozone thick in his nose. He wondered, absurdly, whether disintegration would itch. General Vexner stepped forward, savoring the moment like a cat toying with a dying mouse. "Let this be a lesson," the Vorn rumbled, his voice heavy with smugness. "Earth's arrogance ends here." Daniel didn't dignify it with a response. He simply stood a little taller, straightened the jacket that now felt ridiculous, and thought about Lisa, the way she laughed when she was scared, the way her hand fit into his like a missing piece he never realized was gone until it wasn't. A life, he thought, was nothing more than a collection of small, stubborn miracles. A sunrise after a night you were sure would kill you. A stranger sharing half a sandwich because hunger looks the same in every species. A laugh breaking the tension in a trench where tomorrow didn't exist. He remembered the soldiers he had left behind. He remembered the promises he couldn't keep. He remembered the sickening understanding that every war was sold with flags and speeches but paid for in broken homes and empty chairs. There was a sick symmetry to it all. One man burned for the sins of a species. One body reduced to atoms to satisfy the fragile egos of civilizations too cowardly to face their own decay. Daniel almost smiled. Humanity had always been messy, noisy, unpredictable. But it had never, not once, pretended that death was anything but a goddamn tragedy. He took a breath, a last breath, though it tasted no different than the thousands before it, and faced the assembly of cowards, tyrants, and bureaucrats with a calmness born not of peace, but of exhaustion. The High Arbiter gestured. General Vexner pressed a control on his wrist. The platform beneath Daniel's feet glowed a sickly blue. Time seemed to slow, just enough for 1,000 tiny, defiant thoughts to flicker through his mind. I hope my socks survive this, just to confuse the forensic team. I hope someone back home remembers that I hated tofu and loved cheap bourbon. I hope they don't stop dreaming. The world exploded into light. Pain didn't come. Just heat, brightness, and a sensation like being peeled away from yourself. Daniel's last coherent thought, before his atoms unraveled like an old sweater chewed by time, was simple, inevitable, and completely, bitterly his own. Figures. I finally get to travel faster than light, and it's straight into a goddamn crematorium. The Antarctic Command Center smelled like recycled air, burnt coffee, and old fear, the kind that soaked into the walls during the bad years and never quite left, no matter how many times they repainted. President Laura Wilson stood frozen in front of the main screen, the taste of metal sharp on her tongue, watching the quantum feed stutter and flicker, then die. The last thing it showed was Daniel Harris standing straight inside the execution field. No screaming. No begging. Just a look that said this was always going to happen, and you damn well know it. In the heavy silence that followed, someone dropped a stylus. The tiny clatter was a gunshot in a room full of people too professional to cry. Admiral Donovan's voice broke first, sandpaper rough and brittle. They killed him. No ceremony. No trial worth the name. Just efficient, industrial-grade murder broadcast across light years, like a sick halftime show at the galaxy's most depressing Super Bowl. Wilson closed her eyes briefly. She had campaigned on promises of diplomacy, restraint, intelligent engagement with extraterrestrial civilizations. She had written speeches about mutual respect, framed policy papers about cultural exchange, even hosted a goddamn interspecies cooking show as a PR stunt. Now, staring at the cold afterimage of one of humanity's finest being flash-fried like a goddamn marshmallow, she realized something old and ugly had slithered back into the room. The understanding that peace was never given. It was only ever loaned, with interest, payable in blood. The quantum alert beacon pulsed on the console before her. Daniel had pressed it. Not out of hope, but out of grim courtesy. Activate Protocol Phoenix. The words hung unspoken, a hammer poised above a world already cracked. Benjamin Cole, Director of Earth Intelligence, cleared his throat carefully. Madam President, we have a 20-minute window before the Confederation broadcast hits public channels. 20 minutes before the entire planet watched a man die for the crime of refusing to kneel. 20 minutes before every hope for peaceful assimilation burned to ashes. 20 minutes before Earth had to decide whether to roll over or roar. Wilson didn't hesitate. Activate Phoenix. The order slid into the room like a blade. Officers moved with grim efficiency, tapping codes, confirming identities, unlocking protocols buried so deep even most presidents hadn't known they existed. Across the solar system, ancient hidden bases stirred. Engines buried under Martian mountains rumbled awake. Asteroid fields blinked to life as ship holes, once disguised as rocks, shed their camouflage. The Kuiper Belt rippled, revealing whole armadas that had squatted invisibly beyond Neptune's indifferent orbit. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't glory. It was survival, sharpened over decades, waiting like a knife in the boot. Because the galaxy, for all its shiny promises, had just taught Earth the final lesson it had somehow dared to hope wouldn't apply here. Trust gets you a handshake. Preparation gets you a future. Deep inside a fortified bunker, Dr. Nicole Rivera oversaw the awakening of Earth's true fleet, the Phoenix Fleet. Ships sleek as knives, blacker than the vacuum between stars, bristling with tech so advanced it made the Confederation's parade float warships look like steam-powered tractors. She watched rows of status screens turn from red to green, one after another, as weapon systems, engines, quantum drives, and countermeasures came online. There was no shouting. No bravado. Just the mechanical symphony of a species that had finally decided enough was enough. In a smaller, more private room, Lisa Harris sat with her son, Jordan, the world shrinking to the size of the screen in front of them. It wasn't grief yet. Grief was slow, poisonous. This was something rawer, louder, the primal scream before the morning begins. Jordan stood rigid, fists clenching and unclenching like he was trying to hold together a world that had already cracked. He wasn't a boy anymore. And thanks to a chamber full of alien cowards, he would never be a son in the same way again. President Wilson entered without ceremony. No entourage. No prepared speech. Just a tired woman carrying the weight of a species on her already battered shoulders. "Lisa," she said softly, voice frayed at the edges. "Jordan. I'm sorry. Daniel was a hero, and a friend." Lisa didn't cry. She just nodded once, a movement so small it felt like a galaxy breaking. Jordan, though, spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "I want to help." Wilson didn't blink. She simply pointed to the holographic tactical map now filling the main war room, thousands of crimson dots blooming across Confederation space, each one a target designated months, sometimes years, ago. "Then suit up. It's time the galaxy learned what happens when you try to break something that refuses to stay broken." Somewhere far above, Earth's hidden fleet shifted, synchronized, ready. A wolf awakening in a forest that had forgotten wolves even existed. Wilson gave the final nod, the final push into history. "Commence hyperspace jumps on my mark." The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Across the dark, cold sea of stars, 3,000 warships vanished into the void. It would have been awe-inspiring if it wasn't so goddamn depressing that every great human achievement still required a soundtrack of incoming fire. Hyperspace wasn't elegant. It didn't hum like a cello or whisper like an angel. It howled. It tore. It was less a journey and more wrenching, like ripping the universe open just wide enough to shove 3,000 angry ships through it. Captain Olivia Clark stood on the bridge of the USS Retribution, hands clasped behind her back, eyes locked on the tactical hologram unfolding like a grim, precise ballet. Blips flared into existence across Confederation space, Earth's fleets dropping out of hyperspace not at designated jump points, oh no, but right at the Confederation's soft, vulnerable throats. No warning. No speeches. No tedious declarations of war written in triplicate. Just arrival. Swift. Surgical. Relentless. Across 1,000 worlds, alarm shrieked too late. Confederation defense grids, smugly touted as impenetrable, folded like cheap umbrellas in a hurricane. Orbiting platforms blinked out one by one, not in fire and glory, but in sharp, cold silence, the way you might turn off an old, useless machine when you finally realized it was doing more harm than good. Olivia watched it all unfold, stone-faced. Once upon a time, she might have felt a rush, pride, anger, maybe even that stupid human thirst for vindication. Now there was only a kind of grim sadness, the kind you feel when you put down a rabid dog. Necessary. Ugly. Utterly goddamn exhausting. The voice of her tactical officer crackled through the hum of controlled violence. Captain, the Von Home fleet has been disabled. No fatalities. Engines and weapons neutralized. They're just floating. Floating. Powerless. Silent. Olivia nodded. Move to secondary targets. Minimize civilian panic. If we must be the monsters in their bedtime stories, let's at least have good table manners. She thought about Daniel Harris, how he'd stood there in that so-called court, head held high while cowards and liars condemned him with the same breath they used to claim moral superiority. They hadn't just killed a man. They tried to kill an idea. That humanity could be better. That maybe, just maybe, Earth could stand among the stars without selling its soul. And now they would pay, not in fire and ash, but in humiliation, the slow death of relevance that comes when you realize the universe doesn't need your permission to move on without you. The Retribution slid into position above the Confederation's central hub, a looming shadow blotting out the station's artificial sunlight. 50 ships followed it, lockstep, an armada birthed from decades of patient, furious preparation. Precision targeting lasers painted the hub's vulnerable points, communication arrays, defensive control centers, docking bays. Not to destroy. To paralyze. It was elegant in the way a guillotine was elegant, brutal, undeniable, final. Across the bridge, her first officer murmured, "Station defenses are offline." Awaiting final orders. Olivia considered for half a second, then nodded. Broadcast visual link. Let's make sure everyone gets a front row seat. The hologram flickered, projecting her image directly into the Grand Assembly's hall where, according to intelligence, half the Confederation's leadership was still busy patting themselves on the back for their brilliant ambush. She smiled, sharp and humorless. "This is Captain Olivia Clark of the Earth Defense Force. Your station is surrounded. Your defenses are disabled. Your leadership is compromised. Your credibility is a smoking crater. We're not here to start a war. We're here to end the stupidity that made one necessary." Behind her, the tactical hologram bloomed with hundreds of crimson markers. Across the Confederation, Earth's fleets were surgically dismantling the myth of invulnerability one installation at a time. No civilian casualties. No planetary bombardments. Just clean, clinical removal of teeth from a snarling, broken machine. Olivia knew what the Confederation delegates were seeing. Their fleets, neutralized. Their weapons, useless. Their political leverage, evaporating like morning mist under the searing sun of human resolve. And in the dead center of it all, the USS Retribution floated, black, massive, utterly unbothered by the terrified scrambling of lesser ships trying to make sense of an enemy that wasn't playing by any rules they understood. They had killed an ambassador and expected Earth to weep, to beg, to collapse. Instead, Earth had stood up, bared its teeth, and proved, once and for all, that it hadn't climbed out of the mud just to be thrown back in by cowards in silk robes. From her command chair, Olivia Clark watched the tactical feed settle into a steady green, all objectives achieved, all targets secured. The Confederation wasn't conquered. It was irrelevant. She leaned back slightly, exhaled, and allowed herself the smallest, most vicious thought. Next time they invite someone to a diplomatic summit, maybe they should just serve coffee, and not the ambassador for dessert. The door to the holding cells didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, collapsing inward with the delicate efficiency of a system that had been politely asked, then violently convinced, to stop being a door. Major Sophia Grant stepped through the smoking frame, combat armor gleaming under the cold lights, weapon slung casually over one shoulder like she was arriving late to a poker game she already knew she was going to win. Captain Elizabeth Mercer barely spared time to blink. Relief warred with fury in her chest, relief that Earth hadn't abandoned them, fury that it had come to this at all. "Captain Mercer," Grant said, voice sharp as broken glass. "Dr. Palmer. Stand ready for extraction. Welcome to Operation, we're not playing nice anymore." Palmer stumbled forward, clutching the battered remains of his translator. "You're early," he managed weakly. Grant grinned, wolfish. "You're late. We started the party without you." Behind her, more soldiers flooded in, silent, focused, terrifying in their professionalism. Not a rabble. Not a rebellion. A force born from years of training for a war everyone had hoped would never come, and then came anyway, dressed up in diplomatic robes and hollow apologies. Elizabeth gathered the survivors, her security team, battered but alive, Palmer, rattled but breathing. They moved through the hallways, surgical and fast, Earth's soldiers peeling back Confederation defenses like an expert cook filleting a fish. No slaughter. No massacres. Just precise, economical violence, the kind reserved for moments when you stopped pretending that treaties meant anything more than a clever way to delay betrayal. Elizabeth caught sight of the central hub's vast windows as they ran, Earth's ships hanging like dark angels over the Confederation station, patient, unblinking, inevitable. It didn't look like a battle. It looked like a reckoning. They weren't running for their lives. They were running toward the final, irrevocable proof that Earth had been underestimated for the last goddamn time. In a shadowed side chamber of the assembly hall, Jordan Harris moved with the cold, surgical focus of a man who had lost the luxury of rage. He and his team cornered General Vexner before the old warhorse could scuttle into whatever bolt hole had been promised to him. The Vorn general sneered, drawing a weapon from beneath his ceremonial robes. A petty, desperate move. The weapon froze mid-air, caught in a containment field Earth tech had hidden in human diplomats' gifts for years. Jordan didn't raise his voice. Didn't gloat. He just walked forward, calm and slow, and said, "You executed my father without trial. You'll get better than you gave. Don't make me regret that." Vexner thrashed, snarled, cursed in languages older than Earth's continents. It didn't matter. Earth's soldiers shackled him with a cold precision born not of hatred, but of discipline. Because hatred was easy. Hatred burned fast and left nothing behind but ashes. Justice, real justice, was slow, deliberate, and so much heavier to carry. Elsewhere, other Confederation leaders were pulled from their bunkers, their hideaways, their comfortable illusions of impunity. There were no executions. No fiery speeches. Only arrest warrants backed by gunmetal and history. Elizabeth's team reached the extraction point just as the station's internal alarms finally decided to notice the invasion. Sirens hooped and wailed like a drunk man realizing too late that he had bet the house on a losing hand. Sophia Grant's extraction ship slid into position with the casual arrogance of a bar brawler walking into a fine dining restaurant. The hatch opened, and Earth's people poured inside. Elizabeth slumped into a crash seat as the ship peeled away from the station. Palmer collapsed beside her, staring at the tactical screen showing Earth's occupation of the hub with an expression halfway between awe and existential nausea. "So," Palmer said finally, voice hollow with exhaustion, This is what winning looks like. Elizabeth closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the hum of the engines under her skin, the ache of bruises blooming across her ribs, the phantom taste of fear still lingering on her tongue. Winning. If you squinted hard enough, maybe. But all she could see was 1,000 silent apologies gathering like storm clouds behind them. To Daniel Harris. To the dream of peace that died screaming in a room full of cowards. To every future negotiation that would now start with a pointed look at Earth's fleet parked outside the window. War wasn't always bombs and bodies. Sometimes it was the quiet, permanent severing of trust, the kind that no number of treaties could ever stitch back together. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving the broken Confederation behind, Elizabeth let out a long, slow breath and thought, not without a bitter smile. Hell of a first day on the new job. Hope the benefits include a decent therapist, and maybe a bottle of something strong enough to disinfect the future. The Grand Assembly chamber smelled different now. Not of polished stone and sanctimonious speeches, but of ozone, fear, and the bitter aftertaste of sudden humility. Gone were the rows of gilded banners and ceremonial sashes. In their place stood armed Earth security teams, quiet as tombstones, spaced neatly between delegates who suddenly discovered that moral outrage was a luxury best reserved for winners. Captain Olivia Clark stood beside Jordan Harris, who wore a simple black uniform without insignia, a reminder that authority didn't need gold braiding when it carried the weight of 3,000 ships behind it. The Confederation leaders, what was left of them, sat stiffly, wary eyes darting toward the silent human guards posted around the chamber. For the first time in living memory, no one dared to grandstand. No one filibustered. No one even coughed too loudly. Jordan didn't raise his voice when he addressed them. He didn't need to. The room leaned in, the way a crowd leans into the executioner's swing, knowing the real lesson wasn't in the act, but in the silence afterward. Earth proposes reforms, he said simply, as if proposing new lunch hours instead of dismantling millennia of entrenched corruption. A justice system with real trials. Equal representation. No more weighted votes for military powers. Simple words. Obvious demands. So obvious, in fact, that they burned like acid when spoken aloud. Across the hall, alien faces, crystalline, scaled, feathered, twitched with the complicated cocktail of relief and terror that came from realizing they might actually have to live up to their founding principles instead of just tattooing them on banners. Olivia watched it unfold, feeling neither triumph nor pity. It was simply maintenance, like cleaning a wound that had festered so long the stench had become background noise. Necessary. Painful. Late. A representative from the Alderian species, a being shaped like living crystal, stood, voice trembling more from hope than fear. We support these proposals, it said. For too long, we have lived under threats, not laws. Others stood too, slowly at first, then faster, species that had survived in the cracks of the Confederation's hypocrisy now daring, for the first time, to hope those cracks might widen into sunlight. Not because Earth promised salvation, but because Earth had proven one terrifying, immutable truth. They didn't need the Confederation. They chose to engage. And that choice gave them a kind of power no weapon could match. Elizabeth Mercer sat in the observation gallery, bruised ribs aching with every breath, watching the birth of something both better and infinitely messier than conquest. This wasn't a victory parade. This was triage after a bar fight, patching up the bleeding with one hand and keeping the other on your knife, just in case. She thought about Daniel Harris, about the way he had stood, proud and doomed, under that execution light. Not for territory. Not for glory. But for the idea that humanity could show up among the stars and be better. Grief twisted behind her ribs, familiar now, an unwelcome roommate who unpacked slowly and refused to pay rent. Jordan's voice broke through her reverie, still calm, still cutting. Earth will not govern you. Earth will not conquer you. But Earth will not tolerate the Confederation returning to what it was. He let the weight of that settle into their bones. A quiet warning, heavier than 1,000 armadas. In the far corner of the chamber, High Arbiter Claxier, now merely Citizen Claxier, hunched low, awaiting trial under Earth's very new, very public, very real system of justice. Not execution. Not revenge. Actual justice, with evidence, defense, and a verdict not bought with fear or favors. It was, Olivia thought grimly, going to confuse the hell out of people. The Confederation wasn't dead. It was worse, it was embarrassed. Publicly. Permanently. And humiliation, when applied correctly, was a far better deterrent than any orbital cannon. In a small private viewing area, Lisa Harris sat with her son, watching the slow, reluctant applause that followed Jordan's final words. It wasn't raucous. It wasn't joyful. It was stunned, like survivors clapping at a funeral because no one knew what else to do. Lisa allowed herself a small, tired smile. Her husband was dead. His dream, battered and bloodied, was still breathing. And somehow, against every screaming piece of common sense, the galaxy was still turning. She squeezed Jordan's hand once, fiercely, and whispered, "Your father would be proud." Jordan nodded, eyes fixed on the scene below. He believed it. Almost. Across the galaxy, Earth's ships began to power down their weapon systems, not out of weakness, but because strength, real strength, didn't need to be flaunted every second. Change had come. It was ugly, reluctant, and already overdue for another scandal. But it had come. In the shadow of history's latest cosmic mess, Olivia leaned toward Elizabeth in the observation deck and muttered, "So, does this mean we're hosting the next galactic potluck? Because if so, I'm not eating anything that glows or moves on its own." The memorial stood in the center of the reformed Grand Assembly Hall, catching the sterile light of the chamber and breaking it into 1,000 fractured reflections. It wasn't grand. It wasn't towering. It was simple, a black stone column, smooth and unadorned, except for one line inscribed in every major language of the Confederation. Earth will not bow to intimidation. Below it, smaller and newer, a second line. And if you try, bring snacks. It's going to be a long day. Lisa Harris stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, the collar of her coat pulled tight against the dry artificial breeze that pumped through the station. She hadn't cried today. She had done all her crying in the long, empty nights between transmissions, between apologies, between dreams she didn't have the energy to remember anymore. Around her, alien delegates murmured soft words, some respectful, some simply unsure how to behave when the music stopped and the lights came on. War, it turned out, was much easier than mourning. You could prepare for war. Nobody ever taught you how to grieve for a man who chose dignity over survival. Jordan stood nearby, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He wore his black uniform with the ease of a man who knew titles were just heavier chains dressed in embroidery. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't crying either. He looked like a man standing at the border between two countries, one where he had been someone's son, and one where he had become something harder, colder, necessary. President Wilson gave a short, solemn speech, all the right words, all the proper regrets. Lisa barely heard it. Words had lost some of their weight after watching how easily they could be twisted into nooses. Instead, she focused on the quiet things. The tremor in Wilson's hand when she mentioned Daniel's name. The subtle way the Earth delegation stood, not in triumph, but in battered solidarity. The way even the most prideful alien representatives avoided meeting the Harris family's eyes. The Confederation had changed. Sure. New systems. New rules. New promises. But Lisa had lived long enough to know that systems didn't save people. People saved people. And sometimes they didn't. Beyond the transparent wall of the station, the galaxy turned, indifferent and immense. Trade routes reopened. Alliances reformed. Treaties were signed with the same pen that had once signed death warrants. And yet, in the quiet spaces, the spaces between headlines and history books, everyone remembered. The humans had come. They had been slapped, spat on, murdered. and they had answered not with screaming tantrums or endless bloodletting, but with the brutal, clinical efficiency of a people who had gotten very tired of being underestimated. Justice had been served. Kind of. Justice in the real world was never pure. It was a battered, grimy thing, handed over with one hand while the other kept a weapon ready just in case. Lisa thought Daniel would have appreciated the irony. He'd always said that peace was just war in slow motion anyway, fewer bullets, more backstabbing. Sometimes he said it with a laugh. Sometimes he didn't. The ceremony ended. Delegates shuffled away, eager to get back to governance, to commerce, to pretending they hadn't nearly destroyed an entire species over fear and stupidity. Lisa stayed a little longer, staring at the stone, tracing the carved words with her eyes. Earth will not bow to intimidation. It was a nice sentiment. Bold. Defiant. Utterly, gloriously human. It would, she reflected, probably be misspelled on some cheap souvenir mugs within a month. Jordan approached, standing beside her without speaking. They stayed like that for a long moment, two shadows bound by blood and absence. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice rough but steady. You think they learned their lesson? Jordan gave a small, grim chuckle. Maybe for a generation or two. Then he shrugged, a slow, tired roll of his shoulders. Or until the next idiot thinks they can poke the bear and not get mauled. Lisa smiled, thin and sharp as winter frost. Good thing Earth's got a whole lot of bears now. They turned away together, moving toward the docks where ships waited to ferry them home, a home still stubborn enough to believe in justice, dumb enough to try again tomorrow, and dangerous enough that nobody in the galaxy would ever forget its name. As they disappeared into the crowd, Lisa allowed herself one last, private thought, one that made her snort quietly under her breath. Great. Daniel dies a hero, and I get stuck explaining humanity's crap sense of humor to a bunch of squid diplomats for the next 20 years. Should have demanded hazard pay. Earth answered betrayal not with chaos, but with precision and strength, reshaping the galaxy's future forever. But what do you think? Was humanity's retaliation justified, or was it the first shot in a war far bigger than anyone imagined? Let's talk about it below. I read every comment. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of love, war, and survival among the stars, make sure you like this video, subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi Love and War Story, and ring the bell. Next time, we dive even deeper into the wars that shaped the galaxy's fate, and you won't want to miss it.